Hey guys, tonight we're heading deep into the ancient heart of Mesopotamia. Dusty streets, bleeding goats, the faint smell of something that might be bread or possibly sewage. You're walking through Uruk, one of the earliest known cities in human history. And trust me, this place is bustling in a way that makes your local farmer's market look like a library after hours. Sacks of barley are being hefted from carts. People in long, linen robes haggle over dates and fish. Somewhere nearby, a scribe is squinting at a clay tablet with the kind of intense concentration normally reserved for escape rooms. You're here to find out how, thousands of years ago, someone first came up with the revolutionary idea of writing down that yes, you did give your neighbor 3 jugs of beer, and yes, he still owes you 2 goats and a cow. This is the story of receipts. Not the soul-numbing printer jam kind you stuff in your wallet and forget about. The original receipts. Ones that helped organize temples, track taxes, and ultimately, accidentally, gave us writing itself. You're about to discover how a civilization that didn't even have iron tools managed to invent one of the most powerful bureaucratic tools in history, and how it all started with wet clay and obsessive note-taking. You probably won't survive this era, by the way. Not unless you enjoy sweating through 40 degrees Celsius heat in wool, drinking beer for breakfast, and living in constant fear that your neighbor's goat might eat your front door. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're still awake, I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is over there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge past a clump of sun-baked children playing with mud, the air thick with that uniquely ancient cocktail of dust, dung, and roasted barley. The clatter of carts and the low rumble of temple drums set the rhythm of city life. Uruk, one of the earliest true cities, is alive with over 40,000 people going about their daily rituals. And rituals here are everything. You pass a vendor offering a smear of dates on bread, and across the road, a man is trying to convince a customer that his fish is only slightly fermented. And right in the center of it all towers the ziggurat, the massive step temple that serves not just as a religious hub, but as a bureaucratic nerve center. The temple controls land, labor, and resources, and it needs to keep track of it all. Which brings us to you. You've just been recruited to assist in the temple's record-keeping office. Congratulations. Your job description? Count things. Write them down. Try not to accidentally invent algebra. You enter a small chamber where 3 scribes are hunched over clay tables. The air is cooler here, shaded from the brutal sun, though the smell of damp clay never quite leaves your nostrils. One scribe hands you a small ball of soft clay and a handful of tiny pebbles, some shaped like cones, others like spheres. These are tokens, and each shape represents a different commodity. The cone, a small measure of grain. The sphere, maybe a goat. Or was it oil? The system is still being refined. Historians still argue whether each shape was standard across cities or if every temple had its own version, like artisanal accounting. But one thing's for sure, these little tokens are the earliest known attempt at keeping track of transactions. When someone brings goods to the temple, you count the items and seal the corresponding number of tokens inside a clay envelope called a bulla. You seal it, stamp it with a personal mark, usually some carved lines or a crude drawing of a stickman goat, and let it dry in the sun. The best part? You can't open the bulla without breaking it, so it's basically the ancient version of a tamper-proof envelope. You and the temple priest both have to agree on what went inside, and no one can accidentally lose a goat on the books. As you sit with your hands in a pile of squishy clay and attempt to remember whether 3 cones and a flattened disc equals 1 shipment of beer or just a party for 5, it occurs to you. This system is both incredibly smart and mildly infuriating. Outside, someone is yelling about a missing ox. You glance up from your tablet, wondering if you'll be roped into verifying the man's claim. After all, someone has to check whether the tokens match the actual animal that supposedly went missing from the records. One of the senior scribes leans over and mutters, "It's always the ox, never the chicken. People don't misplace chickens." You try not to laugh. That sort of thing gets clay in your nose. The scene outside the temple is just as chaotic. Farmers are queued with bundles of reeds, jugs of oil, even an occasional turtle, which apparently counts as currency in some districts. You scribble as fast as you can, knowing that if you drop one of the tiny tokens, it could throw off an entire week's worth of inventory. You're not just recording quantities, you're enforcing fairness, making sure that if one family gives the temple 10 measures of barley, they're not mistakenly given credit for just 8. And in a society where famine is always one bad flood away, that difference matters. As the sun sets over Wuruk, you step outside for some air, your hands still smudged with bits of drying clay. You've counted grain, goats, beer, bricks, baskets, and something a man claimed was just a really angry cat. You let it slide. Everyone's tired. You look down at the small clay envelope in your hand, sealed, stamped, quietly waiting to be archived. It doesn't look like much, but 5,000 years from now, some archaeologist is going to dig it up, turn it over in their hands, and marvel at your sleepy little job. They'll ask questions, lots of them. Why did people use cone-shaped tokens? Why store them inside sealed clay envelopes? Why did receipts come before writing? And you, exhausted from the heat and the hum of Uruk's temple life, will smile and whisper, because someone needed to remember who owed who a goat. You wake up the next morning, though wake is a generous term. Sleep comes in bursts when your bed is a reed mat and the neighbor's rooster thinks sunrise happens at midnight. But duty calls, and your first stop is, once again, the dusty corridor of the temple administration office. Today's task? Barley to beer conversions, which is exactly as glamorous as it sounds. You plop down beside the others, stretch your stiff back, and reach for a fresh handful of clay. The head scribe, whose name might be Arbu or possibly just Sir, mutters something about quotas and thrusts a small pouch of clay tokens towards you. They're warm from the morning sun, and there's a faint imprint of a barley stalk on one of them, a reminder of what's being tracked. The Sumerians, clever desert-dwelling alchemists that they were, didn't just drink water. Water could kill you, especially in an era where sewage and drinking fountains had an unfortunate amount in common. Beer, on the other hand, beer was safe, sacred, and occasionally strong enough to knock out a donkey. It also happened to be a unit of economic exchange. Workers got paid in it. Priests offered it to gods. And households needed a predictable amount of barley to make just the right brew. Too little, and you got sadness water. Too much, and someone might wander into a canal and start speaking fluent goat. So your job? Record how much barley was taken from the temple stores, who received it, and how many measures of beer they owed back in return. These weren't simple one-to-one trades either. The conversion rates depended on quality, season, and sometimes just good old-fashioned priestly favoritism. You scribble carefully on a clay tablet, 1 line per transaction, 3 baskets of barley taken by Lou Enlil to repay in 7 jugs of standard beer. Then 2 baskets, apprentice brewer, expected return, 4 jugs, sour batch allowed. And yes, that last one had a little star next to it, your version of a sticky note, reminding you to check in on whether the beer turned out as terrible as expected. Outside the temple walls, things are no less complex. The barley itself arrives in woven sacks, often damp and crawling with what you hope are just bugs and not extra protein. You inspect each load, nod, and wave it in. There's a system to it all, and once you get into the rhythm, it's oddly soothing. Scoop, weigh, tally, record. The clay cools your fingertips even as the sun bakes your scalp. Somewhere nearby, someone starts chanting a hymn to Ninkasi, the goddess of beer, basically a polite request not to poison half the neighborhood. Historians still argue whether these early records were solely economic or if they also served spiritual purposes. After all, if the temple gave you barley and you made beer, weren't you participating in a divine transaction? A gift passed from the gods to the people, then back again? Your fellow scribe, a teenager with an unfortunate unibrow, leans over and says, "Lu Enlil claimed he lost a jug, said his son drank it." You both roll your eyes. That old excuse again. You make a note in the corner of the tablet. Debtor claims loss to minor, request corroboration. Translation, he's lying. Probably. As you file your tablets, you glance around the room. Walls lined with low shelves hold rows of sun-dried clay records, each labeled with a thumbprint, a symbol, or sometimes a short inscription. Some even have small drawings. A smiling figure holding a jug, a goat, or what might be someone tripping over a chicken. You're not entirely sure, but here's where things get clever. Because alongside the receipts for beer and barley, you're also tracking time. See, most of these payments are due later. That means someone, maybe you, has to come back, check if the goods were delivered, and update the record accordingly. That's right. Ancient Sumer had follow-up appointments. And people complain about email. Lunch today is a fig and some leftover flatbread. You eat it slowly, savoring the quiet, until the unibrow teen returns with another pouch of barley tokens and a harried look. "There's a dispute," he says, "between two vendors. They say they were promised the same delivery." You groan softly. Time to play ancient customer service. You follow him outside to the temple courtyard, where two men are waving clay tablets at each other like angry librarians. One claims he was owed 5 baskets of grain. The other insists it was his contract and he has the tokens to prove it. You examine both tablets. One has your handwriting. The other, well, the lines are wobbly, the impressions shallow. A forgery. Not even a good one. You look up. "Who made this tablet?" The man sweats. "My cousin. He's very artistic." You break the fake tablet with a practiced flick, watching the shards fall into the dust. Justice. Sumerian style. Clay doesn't lie. By now, the sun is dipping low again, turning the baked city golden. People are heading home, their robes dust-streaked and their donkeys resigned to one more trip through the alleys. You return to the office to record the day's events. More beer distributed, more barley received, one forgery busted, another quiet victory for the receipts. As you stack the tablets on a drying rack, the head scribe gives a rare nod of approval. "No missing goats today," he says. A good omen, apparently. You smile faintly, rub the dried clay from your hands, and stretch your legs. The quiet hum of the temple surrounds you now. You glance at the day's last token, a tiny disc meant to represent a small amount of oil. It glints faintly in the evening light, simple yet strangely elegant. It's not much, but it matters, because someday, somewhere, someone will want proof. Proof that something happened, that something changed hands, that someone, however briefly, was owed something. And you were there to write it down. You return the next morning, sore from sleeping on your side for too long, with clay still under your nails and the ghost of barley dust in your hair. A breeze cuts through the temple courtyard, carrying the scent of fresh dung and roasting fish, which, oddly enough, tells you two things. The market's open and the goats are agitated again. You sigh. Back inside the scribe's chamber, the first job of the day is far from glamorous. You're tasked with checking the backlog of deliveries. This means you get to play the thrilling game of chisel through yesterday's receipts and see who forgot to return the favor. It's a slow, methodical task, flipping through the dried tablets, matching names, tokens, dates. But there's a comforting rhythm to it. And here's where the system really shines. The Sumerians, for all their temple gossip and questionable hygiene habits, were nothing if not organized. They had a surprisingly advanced method of tracking goods and services using combinations of clay tokens, each one representing a standardized item or measure. You thumb through a pouch of tokens, a cone for grain, a sphere for oil, a cylinder for livestock. Each token fit into a corresponding envelope made of clay, yes, literal envelopes, which you'd seal and inscribe with identifying marks. And if someone tried to tamper with it, well, they'd have to smash it open, and then good luck arguing your innocence. It's not just receipts you're managing, it's proto-bureaucracy in all its bureaucratic glory. You pull out an old envelope from last month, it's addressed, well, impressed, with a merchant seal. Carefully, you crack it open and pour the tokens into your palm. 5 tiny pebbles for barley, 1 lump for silver, and a flat disc that once stood for dried fish. The transaction went through. Now you check the ledger tablet beside it, which reads in ancient scribbled cuneiform. To Ubarmes for delivery of 1 ox and 10 dried river fish, payment of 5 barley units received, silver pending. You glance over to the pile of silver tokens, still untouched. Uh-oh. You scribble a small notation on a fresh tablet. Ubarmes, delinquent on silver payment, 4th notice. You don't actually expect him to show up with the coins. Silver's scarce, after all, and most people hoard what they've got. But the notation matters. In a system where paper doesn't exist and memory is about as reliable as a donkey on stilts, clay is king. If it's not etched into a tablet, it didn't happen. Historians still debate whether these token systems were universal or whether local variations made them more symbolic than exact. After all, what counted as a unit of fish in the city of Uruk might be half a basket of disappointment in Lagash. And don't even start on Nippur. They once counted beer jugs using hollow reeds for reasons nobody's been able to adequately explain. But despite the inconsistencies, it worked. You could track trade, measure obligations, and even resolve disputes, all without a single scroll. Mid-morning, a priest arrives in his ceremonial robe, which looks like he fell into a fancy rug shop. He brings with him a special order, 20 baskets of barley to be distributed among temple laborers during the upcoming harvest festival. You take a fresh tablet and begin inscribing. First, you press his seal into the wet clay, an elegant spiral with a stylized horned cap, symbol of his office. Then, line by line, you carve. Priest Lugal Marduk requests 20 baskets barley. Purpose, festival offering. Delivery deadline, 5th day before full moon. You also write the names of 3 witnesses. Because let's be honest, even in ancient Sumer, someone's going to accuse someone else of skimming off the top. You file the tablet with the others and begin preparing the token envelope. You count out 20 barley tokens, flat ovals with diagonal impressions, and gently press them into a ball of clay. You seal the ball, stamp it with the temple's mark, and set it aside to dry. Another packet of ancient paperwork, ready to sit on a shelf until someone gets cranky about unpaid barley. And as you do all this, you wonder, not for the first time, what it would be like to live in a world without receipts. How did people track debts before this? Did they just hope the other guy was honest? Did they swear oaths by the moon and hope the gods were paying attention? You shake your head. Even now, people try to cheat the system. Like the man who tried to accidentally switch his tokens, replacing his 3-fish marker with a 6-fish one. You caught it, of course. You always do. That's your job, making sure the city doesn't crumble under the weight of, oops, I forgot to pay. Your stomach growls. Lunch today is a boiled onion and half a cucumber. You chew slowly, sitting in the temple shade, listening to the distant clang of bronze tools against stone. The masons are repairing the outer wall again. Some apprentice miscalculated the alignment, and now it leans suspiciously westward, like it's had one too many jugs of celebration beer. One of the senior scribes joins you. He's older, with hands like sun-dried leather and a habit of humming while he eats. You know, he says around a mouthful of lentil mush, In the old days, we didn't even use envelopes, just tokens strung on cords. Easier to lose, though. You nod. Or to eat if you're not paying attention. He chuckles. By evening, you've logged 16 transactions, filed 3 disputes, and somehow acquired a mild sunburn on your left forearm. You clean your stylus, gather your tablets, and walk home through the crowded lanes of the city. Children chase each other with clay slings. An old woman sells roasted locusts on a stick. Somewhere, a man is loudly insisting he paid last week. And no, he does not owe you any more fish. You glance back at the temple, its tall brick columns glowing in the last rays of daylight. Tomorrow, you'll be back. The barley will still need tracking, the silver will still be overdue, and the receipts, like quiet little stories, will keep piling up. The next morning arrives with a low thrum of market chatter, roosters doing their level best to imitate alarm bells, and someone playing a flute 2 notes off from pleasant. You blink awake to the faint scent of sesame oil and dust, stretch your legs out over your reed mat, and wonder, again, why the neighborhood potter insists on firing his kiln before sunrise. Today is not a normal day. You've been summoned. Not by the usual priest or overworked accountant, but by one of the temple's highest-ranking overseers, a man so wrapped in tassels and titles that people have forgotten his original name. He goes by supervisor of the storehouse allocations, but between you and everyone else, you just call him the guy with the fancy belt. You meet him in the shaded colonnade behind the temple granary, where the air smells strongly of last year's wheat. He doesn't greet you, just gestures toward a massive pile of freshly molded clay balls, each still damp, each filled with tokens, and each without a single inscription. These, he says in a tone that suggests both mild rage and early indigestion, are from the Western Canal farms. Delivered with no markings, I need someone to sort them out. You don't ask why no one else can do it. You already know. No one else wants to. So you sit cross-legged in the dust, sleeves rolled up, faced with the Mesopotamian equivalent of sorting through a year's worth of unlabeled spreadsheets. One by one, you break open the envelopes. Some hold the usual barley tokens. Others, a mix, cone-shaped ones for grain, round ones for oil, discs for dried fruit. But then, halfway through the pile, you find a sealed ball that contains nothing, just air. You frown. Someone's either made a spectacular mistake or, more likely, attempted to pass off an empty receipt to cover up a missing shipment. The real surprise? This happens all the time. Ancient Sumer might have invented the receipt system, but they also inadvertently invented embezzlement. Historians still argue whether this sort of trickery was widespread or if the tablets we found just reflect isolated cases. Some believe entire local economies revolved around strategically misreported shipments. Others think it's just human error baked into 110-degree heat and bad handwriting. You set the empty envelope aside, marking it with a small clay wedge. Suspicious, you write, though your stylus slips halfway through, turning the word into something closer to soupish. You shrug. Close enough. By mid-morning, your hands are gray with clay dust, and your back feels like it's been personally audited by the god of lumbar pain. But the job must go on. To make sense of the chaos, you start categorizing the token balls based on what they should have been used for. There's one for temple sacrifices. These usually include lamb and incense tokens, sometimes a curved piece for wine. Another batch seems to be for brickwork payments, cylinders representing mud bricks, and a few triangle tokens that, you suspect, symbolize overtime. In one odd envelope, you discover a handful of crescent-shaped tokens and a bit of fine sand. This doesn't match any standard set you've seen. You tilt it toward the light. Could be moon-shaped tokens for nighttime labor, or ceremonial night festivals, or, as your stomach reminds you, crescent dumplings. You don't know. No one does. Scholars still debate the full function of many Sumerian tokens, especially rare shapes like crescents, zigzags, or the occasional carved turtle. Some argue they were mnemonic aids. Others think they had ritual value connected to seasonal rites. The more you dig, the more it becomes clear. This system was never meant to be tidy. It was meant to work. There's a kind of beauty in the mess. And here's the thing you've come to appreciate. Even though these receipts are made from mud, baked in sun, and brittle to the touch, they hold entire human moments inside. This one? A farmer's offering to the moon goddess after a good harvest. That one? Payment for a singer who performed at a temple birth ceremony. And this one, flattened and smeared, could have been crushed in someone's panic when the shipment went missing. Clay remembers. You pause to stretch and wipe your face with the edge of your tunic. There's a flock of birds circling over the Euphrates, probably chasing the afternoon wind. Somewhere nearby, a priest is lecturing a group of apprentices on the difference between a trade token and a tax token, though it sounds more like a bedtime story than a lesson. You chuckle. If only they knew how often those two get mixed up. Just last week, someone tried to pay a temple fine with a token marked for livestock donations. Technically valid, but not exactly subtle. You caught it, of course, but it raised a question you've been quietly mulling for days now. What happens when the system itself doesn't match the world anymore? See, Sumeria's growing, fast. Cities like Uruk and Kish are booming. Trade routes stretch from the Persian Gulf to the Zagros Mountains. And yet here you are, still pushing little bits of clay into balls like it's 3100 BCE. You wonder if the system will scale, or if one day some bright young scribe will come up with something faster, flatter, easier to store. Maybe a method that doesn't involve drying racks and pigeon-related accidents. For now, though, this is your world, a rolling stack of tablets, a pouch full of tokens, and the hum of commerce beating beneath it all. By the time the sun leans westward and shadows stretch like long, sleepy cats across the courtyard, you've sorted the entire pile. 28 valid deliveries, 3 suspicious ones, 1 envelope filled with pebbles, you still have no idea why, and 1 sealed packet that contains, delightfully, what looks like a child's clay toy. You hold it up, turning it over in your hand. It's a tiny bull, roughly molded, 1 horn chipped, no tokens inside, just whimsy. You smile, because even in the oldest filing system in the world, someone found time to slip in a bit of art. You leave the pile of cracked clay envelopes behind, your fingers still caked with mud and the faint scent of old barley lingering under your nails. The courtyard feels quieter now, almost reverent, like even the city's noise takes a midday nap. But you don't get long to bask in your triumph over ancient bureaucracy. A runner arrives, barefoot, breathing like he's been chased by an angry goat god, and thrusts a baked tablet into your hands. It's an invitation, sort of. Apparently, the chief scribe of the Temple of Nanshe, goddess of justice and fishing quotas, wants your opinion. You? Just a humble recorder of tokens and receipts? Yep. Apparently, you're starting to get a reputation. Not bad for someone whose last recorded title was Junior Clerk of the Outer Granary Floor. You follow the runner past the western edge of the city, through a maze of reed homes, where laundry flaps like temple flags and children chase each other with sticks pretending to be gods. You cross a small irrigation canal, where fish the size of your hand leap at gnats, and then step into the shady entryway of the Temple of Nanshe. It's cooler here, built partly underground. The walls smell of burnt fish oil and damp stone, and someone's humming what sounds like a lullaby for account ledgers. You're led into a low-ceilinged chamber where the chief scribe waits, squatting on a cushion that's been flattened by decades of government secrets. He greets you without looking up. We need to talk about the shell tokens. You blink. Shell? He gestures to a tray. Laid out are a dozen tokens made not from clay, but from carved shell, gleaming, delicate, shaped like tiny boats, fish, and crescents. They're exquisite. These have been appearing more often, the scribe says. We think they're from the coastal traders, possibly from Dilmun. That's interesting. Dilmun, the mysterious trade hub across the Gulf, is something of a legend in your circles. Supposedly a land of pure goods, clean water, and no taxes. That last part's probably just wishful thinking. But if they're using shells instead of clay, what does that mean for your precious receipt system? Historians still argue whether the Sumerians fully accepted foreign token systems or tried to impose their own. Some believe trade centers had hybrid accounting systems, a blend of imported shells, carved bone, and local clay, while others think these were novelty items, like the Mesopotamian equivalent of souvenir coins. You pick up one of the shellfish. It's astonishingly smooth, with incised lines like gills. You turn it over. No markings, no numbers. How do they record value, you ask? The chief scribe leans closer, smelling faintly of cumin and anxiety. That's the problem. We don't know. They trade them as is, hand to hand. No envelopes, no tablets, just trust. You try to hide your horror. Trust? No fire-sealed containers? No scribe signing off with long-winded curses like, "May your grain rot thrice if this is false"? Just a handshake and a shiny shell? Wild. But also freeing. The scribe continues. Some say this is the future. Fast, portable, adaptable. You eye the pile of baked clay envelopes in the corner of the room and wonder how long they'll last in the face of seashell capitalism. Still, the Sumerians are nothing if not inventive. Already there's talk of hybrid tokens, clay embedded with shell or shaped like animals to indicate categories. You've even heard of tokens made from copper, experimental, expensive, and terrifyingly easy to fake. But you don't say any of that out loud. Instead, you nod sagely and mutter, "Maybe we should start baking shells." The chief scribe does not laugh. After the meeting, you step outside and pause to take in the city from this slightly elevated hill. Uruk sprawls below, its canals glinting, its temples like sandcastles with divine ambition. And there in the bustle and haze, you can see the tangle of trade paths, flatboats along the river, carts creaking with barley, runners darting between merchant stalls with tablets held like precious treasure. All of it fueled by trust, yes, but also by memory. And mud. Lots of mud. As you make your way back to your side of the city, a thought forms. This system you're part of, it's not just about counting things. It's about telling stories without words. Tokens and clay that speak of harvests, agreements, even broken promises. You stop briefly to watch a group of children playing a guessing game with palm-sized clay pebbles. One of them declares, "This one means I owe you 3 figs and a poem." The others giggle and nod, completely satisfied with the exchange. And just like that, you realize the essence of receipts, the real heart of the thing, isn't just numbers. It's memory. Mutual memory. Proof that we were here and this is what we did. You reach your workshop as the sun starts to dip and the air thick with heat and stories half finished. There's work to do. Someone scrawled a message in dust on your table. Market receipts missing, again. You sigh. You stretch. You pour yourself a bowl of date water and think briefly of shellfish and cities that don't yet exist. And then you sit down to sort through the next pile of problems, armed with your stylus, your tablets, and the slow-burning thrill of someone who knows that even in the softest clay, the past leaves its mark. The market square of Uruk hums with the rhythm of barter and sunburn. You step lightly between stalls, dodging runaway goats and the occasional careless elbow from a flower vendor who still insists on measuring with his lucky scoop, which, spoiler alert, is not standard weight by any stretch. You're not here to shop. You're here on a mission. The temple scribes have lost another batch of market receipts again. That makes 3 times this month, and while some suspect petty theft, you're more inclined to blame the junior tablet boy who recently tried to dry damp clay tablets using fire. Open flame, real genius move. So now you're trying to retrace the steps of a transaction that, according to witnesses, involved 20 jars of fish sauce, a bundle of reeds, and possibly a live chicken. The chicken was apparently bartered halfway through and replaced with a dried melon. Receipts were written. Probably. You find the fish sauce seller, an old man with a beard that's at least partially fossilized. He squints at you. "You the scribe, kid?" he grunts. You nod. He points to a jug. "There's your receipt." You examine the jug. Nothing is written on it. "That's a jug," you say gently. "Exactly," he replies. "We write less, we break less." He's not wrong. You notice a trend across the market. More vendors are skipping the clay tablets in favor of what they call memory marking. This is not a formal system. It involves dented jars, knotted ropes, and one enterprising baker who sings a jingle for every transaction and claims sound is harder to lose than tablets. Historians still argue whether these alternative methods, known loosely as proto-ledgers, were transitional steps or parallel systems. Were they informal workarounds or legitimate systems in their own right, dismissed only because they left less archaeological trace? You find yourself scribbling notes on the edge of a grain sack, your stylus scraping over woven straw like it's clay. You can't help but admire the ingenuity. These aren't lazy record keepers, they're innovators working with what they've got. One fishmonger shows you his entire inventory record, a string of dried fish tails, each tied with different colored twine. "Blue twine means already paid," he says proudly. "Red means tell my cousin to pay tomorrow." You blink. "And green?" "Means the fish is cursed." You make a note to avoid green twine fish forever. As you wind through the square, it becomes clear that the original receipt system, the token and envelope method, wasn't universal. It was ideal for temple transactions or intercity trade where goods traveled far and records needed to be verified. But on the ground, where everyone knew everyone and chickens changed hands twice before breakfast, people used more fluid systems. You begin to sketch out an idea in your mind, a hybrid model. Use the formal clay systems for big deals and informal tokens, ropes, or memory songs for the rest. You could even create a system where simple marks on pots or lines drawn on walls serve as shorthand records. You run into one of your old mentors, a woman known as the Grain Witch, not because she practices magic, but because she can tell the quality of barley by sniffing it. She grins at your disheveled tunic. "Still chasing lost tablets?" she asks. "More like chasing new ones," you reply. She nods and hands you something unexpected, a long piece of hardened bitumen carved with shallow indentations. "Saw this in Kish. They're calling it a ledger stick." It's clever, symbols carved into resin instead of clay, durable, waterproof, and impossible to accidentally stomp on when drunk. Looking at you, tablet boy. You study the piece. Rows of fish, bundles of grain, a weird squiggle that might be either oxen or "you owe me lunch." The market continues to swirl around you, alive with smells, fried onions, crushed dates, drying leather. You pass a woman bartering dyed wool using what appears to be a set of stones marked with tiny notches. The stones are smooth from handling, worn like prayer beads. This too is memory, a kind you carry in your hands, not in your kiln. You begin to see the receipt system not as one invention, but as 1,000 tiny ones, evolving in every stall, in every pocket. The Sumerians didn't just invent the receipt. They invented many receipts, each suited to a time, a place, a person. Some were formal, some improvised, some sung. And in that chaos, cursed fish and all, you feel something like awe. Back at your workshop, you clear a space on the bench. You lay out your new collection. Twine, stones, a slice of marked bitumen, a green twine fishtail, purely for educational purposes, and a freshly baked clay envelope. You stare at the spread and murmur, maybe it's not about one system winning. Maybe, just maybe, it's about finding the system that survives a rainy day, a distracted scribe, and one very sneaky chicken. You wake the next morning to the sound of pigeons aggressively cooing above your window. One of them drops a little gift onto your sill, directly onto your notes. You sigh, wipe it away with a palm leaf, and try to remember what clever thought you had just before falling asleep. Ah, right. Rain. Specifically, what happens when your entire accounting system is based on sun-dried clay, and then the gods decide to open the sky like a particularly grumpy wineskin? Because today, my friend, the clouds are gathering over Uruk, and not metaphorically. The city smells of wet dust and the scribes are panicking. You're barely 2 sips into your morning date beer when someone bangs on your door. It's the rain, they gasp. The temple ledgers. You're already sprinting. By the time you reach the tablet vault, chaos reigns. A young apprentice, who you suspect may actually be 2 goats stacked under a robe, has dropped an armful of damp tablets onto the floor. A corner of the roof has sprung a leak right above the storage shelf marked grain loans, do not smudge. You leap into action. With a rag and a shout, you start hauling tablets to safety. You tuck the most fragile ones under an awning made of basket lids and shout for more hands, more cloth, more anything. This is where the flaws of the system reveal themselves, clear as a temple bell in winter. Clay may be abundant, cheap, and sacred in its own dusty way, but it's not exactly what you'd call weatherproof. One unexpected downpour and a whole year's worth of debt records can turn into a very historical sort of soup. Historians still argue whether Sumerians attempted large-scale waterproofing of their archives. Some say they used bitumen-lined vaults or covered jars. Others believe most records were temporary by design, meant to be broken, not preserved. You don't have time to debate. You've got a wheelbarrow full of soggy promissory notes and one temple priest muttering that this must be the goddess Inanna's judgment for that time we undercounted the barley. You, however, aren't quite so fatalistic. You gather your team and announce a solution, perhaps a little too loudly. We're going to copy everything onto stone. Dead silence. Stone, in case you're wondering, is very durable, also very heavy, and expensive, and chiseling one character into it takes roughly as long as a goat's entire adolescence. But still, you argue, it might be time to rethink clay-only policies. So you test it. A sample tablet, carefully transcribed onto a flat stone slab using a copper chisel. It's beautiful. It's practically immortal. It's also wildly impractical for daily transactions. By the time you've finished etching one customer's barley return, the customer has moved to another city and changed his name. You sigh. Back at your bench, you start experimenting with clay mixtures. A little sand here, a dash of crushed shell there. Some say adding camel dung improves durability. Others just enjoy watching you sniff things like a cursed baker. Nothing quite works. And then you remember something. The hybrid sticks from Kish. Bitumen, durable, dark, slightly flammable, but surprisingly good at keeping records dry. You start carving onto the stuff, using short, thick strokes. Your writing doesn't look elegant. It looks like someone tried to stab a tar pit, but it lasts. You try pouring a little water on the surface. It beads off, rolls away. Victory. You pitch the idea to the temple. Use bitumen for the important stuff. Contracts, debts, laws, and leave the daily counting to clay, like how you wouldn't write a love poem on a wall or a shopping list on a tombstone. They hesitate. Bitumen is harder to source. And then you show them what happened to the barley records from last week. One priest starts crying. Proposal approved. You begin issuing new dual records, one clay, one tar. The scribes grumble, but soon they're inventing shorthand symbols just for the bitumen slabs. An entire new script begins to emerge, one that flows better on sticky surfaces, that doesn't crumble if you drop it on a wet floor. Not everyone's thrilled. The Potters Union files a formal complaint. Less clay means less work. You nod solemnly and offer them a contract, on clay, of course. As the weeks pass, Uruk begins to adapt. Storage rooms are rebuilt with slanted ceilings. Archive vaults are lined with reeds and sealant. Receipts are sorted by type, durability, and season. Rain no longer spells catastrophe. It's just a minor inconvenience. You even design a special tablet box with a lid and tiny holes for airflow. You call it the box of eternal debt. It doesn't catch on. Marketing was never your strength. One day, as you finish copying a fish tax into bitumen, a young apprentice sidles up. Is it true, he asks, that in the old days, scribes used to swallow the tablets they couldn't finish? You raise an eyebrow. Only if they wanted a very long conversation with the underworld gods. He grins and runs off. It hits you then. The system is evolving. You're not just saving receipts anymore. You're shaping how memory works. What gets remembered, what fades, what the next generation will dig up, look at, and whisper, what were they thinking? You stand beneath a clear sky, bitumen slab in one hand, stylus in the other, and for a brief moment you wonder, will they remember you? Will they find your clay, your shortcuts, your stubborn insistence that wet equals bad? Maybe not, but you'll have tried. And somewhere in a quiet vault, a fish receipt will endure, dry and intact, whispering, 4 silver shekels, paid, in full. The dry season returns with a vengeance. Dust rolls through Uruk like gossip through a palace corridor, everywhere, irritating and entirely unavoidable. But for once, your records are safe. The bitumen slabs hum quietly in their vaults, cool and smug. Clay tablets rest in neatly tiered rows, sorted by type, grain loans, goat leases, fish futures, and one entire shelf labeled MISC that you suspect hides the more embarrassing debts. Still, something tugs at you, an itch in the back of your mind. You've stabilized the receipt system within the city walls. But what about outside them? Your answer arrives in the form of a donkey caravan, covered in dust, trailing flies, and led by a trader whose teeth appear to be mostly decorative. He unrolls a cloth bundle on your table. Inside, knotted cords, painted pebbles, and a flattened gourd scratched with unfamiliar marks. This, he declares, is the receipt system of the Highlands. You blink. Which Highlands? He grins. Yes. The man's name, loosely translated, means he who barters with slightly too much confidence. He's been trading between city-states and far-off mountain tribes, and he brings with him a revelation. The Sumerians are not alone in the business of bookkeeping. You lean in. The cords, he explains, represent livestock. 1 knot for each goat, 2 knots for a breeding pair, and a little shell tied to the end means payment pending. The pebbles, that's for grain. Black pebbles are wheat, white ones are barley. And if someone gives you a red one, it means you've been cheated, but nicely. Historians still argue whether these early quipu-like systems in Sumer's periphery were inherited from neighboring cultures, co-developed independently, or simply evolved out of the primal human instinct to count stuff and then complain about it later. You're fascinated. The trader describes a tribe where debts are remembered not with objects, but with songs. Entire families pass down trade agreements through generations of music. My grandfather owed your uncle a jar of beer becomes a catchy tune that children hum while gathering reeds. You imagine future archaeologists unearthing ancient karaoke bars and scratching their heads. Clearly, this was a temple. You begin cataloging these foreign receipt systems, much to the annoyance of the temple board, who believe anything not baked in a proper kiln is a suspicious form of witchcraft. You gently remind them that the gods have not yet issued a style guide. Your notes grow thick with symbols, dots, dashes, scratches, shells. You try to replicate one tribe's method of record keeping, carving on bamboo reeds and then burning them slightly for emphasis. You only set your sleeve on fire once. Progress. One afternoon, you get bold. You stage a demonstration in the market. You invite the bitumen chiselers, the tablet scribes, and the cord knotters to a single tent. There, you present your idea, a universal receipt protocol, one that incorporates visual symbols, texture cues, even sound. They stare at you. A goat bleats, then someone claps. The system doesn't replace the old ways. It translates between them. A knotted cord can be paired with a tiny clay tag. A marked pebble can be mapped to a known cuneiform character. You create a sort of receipt Rosetta Stone, and suddenly, traders who once stared blankly at each other over a pile of onions are nodding in agreement. This changes things. Trade routes expand. Temple priests grudgingly accept that a cord from the hills might actually represent real value. And your desk? Buried in correspondence. You find yourself issuing receipts for things you didn't know needed receipts. Rented jewelry, borrowed umbrellas, one bet involving who could eat the most fermented beans in 5 minutes. As you document all this, you begin to realize the receipt system isn't just for counting, it's for trust. It lets people believe in future delivery and promises, in that peculiar human idea of, I'll get you back later. You even get philosophical about it, because that's what happens when you haven't slept and you've inhaled too much bitumen dust. You mutter to yourself, what is a receipt if not a formal way of saying, I owe you stability? Your apprentice, who is mostly there to make sure you don't eat clay when distracted, replies, I think it's a fancy way to avoid fights. He's not wrong. By now, Uruk is buzzing with systems. Market scribes use styluses that vary in tip shape to encode more info per stroke. A new batch of wax-coated slates arrives from the south, reusable and oddly satisfying to scratch into. And one ambitious young scribe tries carving into dried bread crust, insisting it's multi-purpose. You call his invention the snack ripped. It doesn't catch on. But the spirit of experimentation spreads. Across Sumer, city-states adapt your ideas. Some turn to colored clay tablets, pink for taxes, blue for wages. Others adopt rhythmic chanted receipts, timed with drum beats so they're harder to forget. You even hear rumors that far to the east, someone is trying to breed a bird that sings the day's prices at dawn. You hope that one's true. You draft a document that outlines it all, the cross-cultural receipt glossary. Every pebble, knot, mark, and symbol you've studied. It's long, possibly longer than any one person will ever need. You title it, modestly, The Biggish Guide to Not Getting Cheated. Your apprentice suggests adding illustrations. You agree, but veto his drawing of a goat wearing sunglasses. Some things are sacred, and through it all, a quiet satisfaction grows. You're not just archiving trade, you're charting human thought. The way people remember, value, and share responsibility, one tiny record at a time. The sun sets on another day of dusty brilliance. You set down your stylus, flex your aching fingers, and smile at the stacks of finished tablets. Not because they're perfect, but because they'll outlast you. Unless, of course, someone uses them to prop up a cooking fire. You're halfway through cataloging a particularly tricky series of chicken-related debts when someone bursts into your office, a messenger, breathless and flailing, as if chased by a particularly bureaucratic demon. Larsa, he wheezes. They've sent a courier from Larsa. You blink at him over your wax tablet. Do they want their chicken back? No, they want to copy your system. The phrase rolls around your mind like a marble in a cup. Another city-state, not just using your ideas informally, but asking, formally, to adopt them. You set your stylus down carefully like it's suddenly become holy. Larsa's delegation arrives 3 days later, led by a man who insists on being addressed as the Grand Scribe of grain ledgers and other important figures. You call him Gary. Gary brings a pile of scrolls, receipts, trade contracts, and what looks suspiciously like a poem about barley. You offer him a seat and a cup of sour date wine. He offers you a receipt for the cup. Respect. As the sun bakes the rooftops, the two of you compare systems. You realize quickly that Larsa has been developing its own version of receipt keeping. Dual tab systems with clay witness seals, and a rather dramatic flourish involving colored ribbon for temple-approved trades. Historians still argue whether Larsa's developments were directly inspired by Uruk, developed in parallel, or just the result of that inevitable bureaucratic law. Given enough trade, someone will invent a complicated filing system. You spend days in a whirlwind of collaborative chaos. You and Gary swap tricks, joke about common merchant scams, the old missing goat was a twin excuse again, and even standardize a new unit of measurement, the negligible handful. Perfect for taxes. But beneath the surface, a gentle tension hums. Not all cities are keen to harmonize their records. Some fear losing control of their peculiar local quirks. Others simply don't trust their neighbor's clay quality. You understand? Receipts aren't just about tracking goods. They're about control. Who issues them? Who validates them? Who keeps the official copy tucked away in a back room next to a jar labeled Goat Emergency Fund? So your solution is both brilliant and ridiculous. You propose a receipt summit. 1 week later, on the edge of a dusty hilltop, representatives from 6 city-states gather beneath a flap of stitched-together goat hides. There are scribes, priests, merchants, one deeply confused sheep, and you, moderating. You stand beside a large clay slab you've dubbed the Big Tablet. Every scribe gets a turn carving in their city's method for writing 1 bag of barley due in 10 days. At first, it's chaos. Symbols overlap, knots dangle. One person tries to light incense and summon divine approval. But slowly, patterns emerge. Similarities, shared logic beneath the mess. A symbol for day shaped like a sun. A curved stroke for debt. A dot beside a symbol to mean, maybe don't trust this guy. You propose a compromise. Each city keeps its native system, but adopts a shared glossary, an interpretation key attached to major trade receipts. It's not perfect, but it's enough. A merchant from Lagash mutters, "It's like teaching donkeys to sing." You smile. Maybe, but now at least we all know the tune. Back in Nuruk, word spreads. Sumer cities are cooperating, not unifying exactly, but connecting. Bridges built from clay and ink and dusty agreement. You begin to train receipt diplomats, scribes who travel, translating between systems. Some become local legends. One girl from Nippur is so fast at deciphering rival tax documents that people think she's a witch. You send her a thank you tablet and a cake. She sends back a corrected copy of the cake's receipt. Things evolve quickly now. Markets across Sumer begin labeling goods with small clay tags, early price tags with simplified cuneiform symbols for quantity and origin. 2 baskets of dried fish, strong smell, fair trade. Honest advertising. Temple treasuries adopt layered receipts, 1 tablet buried inside another, like bureaucratic nesting dolls. Only senior scribes may crack them open. Some cities use this to hide secret terms, others to store snacks. Even the receipt content changes. Where once it was all wheat and wool, now you're seeing receipts for services, music performed, poems commissioned, even 1 receipt for 5 hours of conversation, non-romantic, mostly weather-related. You make a note to investigate that one. Could be a prototype for therapy. Amid this progress, something surprising happens. People start keeping their receipts. At first, it's practical, proof of payment, avoiding scams. But slowly, it turns emotional. Receipts become memories. A clay tag from your child's first sheep sale. A scratched pebble from the trade that saved your roof. A cord knot given to you by someone who never came back. One woman stops you in the street and pulls out a crumbly tablet faded with time. "My mother wrote this," she says. "It's for 2 baskets of onions and a kiss." She blushes. She never told me who she gave it to. You nod solemnly. Hopefully someone with fresh breath. You start keeping your own collection, not official records, personal ones. A pebble from your first market sale. A broken stylus that once wrote the wrong number and started a 2-week goat dispute. Even Gary's original wine cup receipt, tucked safely in a pouch. At night, when the torches flicker and your apprentice snores under a heap of tablets, you look at those relics and realize, this is bigger than numbers. You haven't just invented a way to track trade. You've helped people remember. You've given them a way to prove they were here, that they lived, traded, owed, forgave, and moved on. And maybe, just maybe, some of those receipts will last. long after the cities fall, long after the goats are gone. If someone finds them, they'll know we counted because we cared. You stretch, roll your sore neck, and reach for one last clay tablet. Tomorrow, you'll teach a new scribe. Tomorrow, you'll start again. But tonight, the ink dries in peace. The problem with being the inventor of the receipt system is that eventually, people start blaming you for everything. A shipment of fish goes missing in Umma. Should have used a better receipt. A priest forgets which god received which grain offering. Well, if your tablets were clearer. You try not to take it personally. Today, you're visiting the markets again, not as a trader, not as a scribe, but as a quiet observer. There's something soothing about the rhythm of it all now. The way the vendors lay out their goods, just so, a little clay price tag next to each pile, 4 shekels for 10 figs, 3 jars of oil, half-broken seals. One enthusiastic potter has carved an entire haiku into his price tag. The meter is off, but the effort is appreciated. And then you spot it, something new. A young merchant is offering pre-stamped receipts. He holds up a bundle of fresh tablets with blanks for quantity, item, and date. "Save time," he yells. "No more waiting on scribes." You blink, unsure whether to be offended or proud. The man notices your expression. "Don't worry," he says. "I still charge extra if they want the fancy wedge script." You buy one just to examine it. The workmanship is shoddy, but the idea, revolutionary. The receipt is no longer just a record, it's a product. You wonder idly if this is how the gods felt when people started worshiping them with pre-written prayers. Historians still argue whether these prefab receipts were a sign of innovation or a slow decline in accuracy. After all, a receipt scribbled on the fly might catch nuance. A mass-produced one, not so much. But still, it's efficient. And sleep-deprived goat traders aren't exactly connoisseurs of calligraphy. You continue your stroll, past the textile stalls, where temple-trained weavers have adopted their own system. Knots of dyed thread looped around sticks, each color and pattern corresponding to a receipt code. It's a little wild, very pretty, and completely indecipherable unless you've trained at the Temple of Counting. You make a note to maybe ask for lessons. A child runs by, shouting about receipt races, and you learn that the local school now teaches cuneiform by having students race to inscribe mock trades. The loser has to carry the teacher's wine jug. You allow yourself a smile. Learning through humiliation, very Sumerian. At the ziggurat steps, you overhear 2 temple accountants arguing over the term partially received goods. One insists it means we took some, not all. The other argues it means we're pretending we took some, but we actually lost everything and are blaming bandits. You consider mediating, but your lunch break beckons. It's date cakes today, sticky, dense, and deeply unfair to those with clay-dusted fingers. You watch the food vendor scribble a receipt with one hand, toss cakes with the other, a true multitasker. He offers you a free sample, then hands you a tiny shard of clay. For taxes, he winks. Even the beggars have adapted. One elderly man has a pile of receipts showing gifts received. He waves them proudly at the guards when they try to move him along. Official donations, he claims, backed by scribal authority. You admire the hustle. You head home through the dusty alleyways of Uruk, where the city's clay kilns puff warm smoke into the pinkening sky. A new sign has been posted by the Potters Guild. Receipts must be signed with witness mark. Apparently, too many people were forging pottery warranties. You didn't even know pottery had warranties. As you near your workshop, you pass the alley where years ago, you first handed a weary merchant a sloppily written promissory tablet in exchange for a basket of onions. You think he undercharged you, honestly. The onions were surprisingly flavorful. He's dead now, drowned in a grain silo accident, you heard. But his receipt still sits in your private collection, faint, cracked, and oddly sentimental. Inside, your apprentice is organizing a new archive. He's labeled the shelves with categories: trade, temple, romantic confusion, and other. The romantic confusion pile is growing disturbingly fast. You glance at one receipt: 3 pomegranates gifted with unclear intent. Ah, a classic. There's also a growing stack of what he calls emotional receipts. Not trades, not debts, just moments people wanted to mark. One woman brought in a small shard that said, "Today I forgave him." No context, no names, just that. You sit with that for a while. It wasn't supposed to be like this. You invented receipts to count goats, not hearts. But perhaps the two were always linked. If love is a kind of debt, maybe forgiveness is the receipt we never expect to cash in. As night falls, you light your oil lamp and begin inscribing your own tablet. Not an official one, just a note to remember today. One bowl of soup traded for silence, a walk, a new idea. You press your seal into the soft clay and set it by the window to dry. Outside, a dog howls in the distance, and someone yells something about an unpaid duck. The city never truly sleeps. But within your workshop, surrounded by shelves of silent witnesses, you feel a rare kind of stillness. You've spent your life chasing accuracy, but it's the ambiguity that lingers. Not every debt needs collecting. Not every receipt needs reading. Sometimes the clay is enough. The next morning, you wake up to find your apprentice already up, trying to stack 2 tablets like bricks. "If we line the whole wall with receipts," he says excitedly, "we can insulate the room and file taxes at the same time." You tell him to go eat breakfast before he invents something dangerous. Outside, the air smells of barley porridge and morning optimism. You walk through the alleys of Wurak, sandals gently slapping the packed earth, and pass a small stand labeled "Replicas Only" for decorative display. Rows of fake receipts sit under the shade of a straw awning. Some are for imaginary gods, others for non-existent transactions. 14 unicorn pelts bartered for eternal youth. A novelty item, clearly, but popular. The vendor waves at you. "People like to feel official," he explains, "even when it's fake." You wonder if this is a harmless joke or the beginning of receipt inflation. Historians still argue whether this growing trend diluted the cultural weight of real records or just made everyone better at deciphering nonsense. In the temple archives, things are getting crowded. Tablets from as far back as your youth are now being carefully refired to preserve them. You spot one from the early days, your own handwriting, lopsided and overly proud. One jug of beer transferred to Enlil storage with thanks. You remember the beer vividly. Too sour, but it had a kick. The high priest arrives, robes dragging slightly in the dust. "We're running out of room," he mutters. "We might need a second archive." You try not to gasp. The first archive is sacred. Adding a second one feels like getting a second grandma. But you understand. Sumerians are not minimalists. We measure worth by quantity, and nothing says wealth like redundant documentation. You're invited to help sort the ambiguous category tablets. These are records too odd to classify. One says 3 shadows bartered for a whisper. Another reads, "Goats returned, slightly insulted." You wonder if these are metaphors or inside jokes. Maybe both. Later, at the artisan's quarter, you meet with a group of potters who are frustrated that their bowls are always traded without a clear quality rating. So you propose a new idea, a clay stamp system, like a review score, 1 to 5 dots along the rim to denote craftsmanship. The potters are thrilled. Within a day, the streets are flooded with dotted dishes. One man begins offering 5-dot only exchanges. Elitism spreads fast. You return home to find your apprentice attempting to catalog feelings. He's made a tablet labeled "Bitterness, Mild, Possibly Justified." You give him a long look. "Just don't let the priest see that," you say. He shrugs. Too late. They ask for a whole shelf of moral receipts. Apparently, temple law is experimenting with recording not just what people do, but what they meant to do. Intentional trespass versus accidental wandering is the current debate. Historians still argue whether these moral intentions ever affected sentencing or were just a way for scribes to show off philosophical flair. Meanwhile, you hear that in Lagash, a city far to the southeast, a local governor has developed a receipt index, a sort of abstract summary. Total debits, total credits, mood of week. You wonder if that governor sleeps. Probably not. The scribes of Uruk, however, are split. Some hate the index. Cold and impersonal, one grumbles. Where's the texture? Others love it. It's like poetry, but bureaucratic. In the evening, a curious visitor arrives. She's from the highlands, a region of nomadic herders who rarely trade with the city. She carries no goods, only a question. How do you make memory last? You blink. Clay, you answer instinctively, but she shakes her head. We use songs. Over date wine, you swap stories. She sings a tune of her ancestors trading honey for bone tools. You show her a receipt for one small mirror given in admiration. She laughs. You're all poets in disguise, she says. That night you dream of tablets humming with melody, each wedge mark echoing a different note, receipts sung instead of written. A strange idea, but not impossible. After all, clay might preserve transactions, but sound carries memory into the air. In the following days, you begin noticing more hybrid practices. A merchant in the square now recites each receipt as he writes it rhythmically. 2 sheep, 1 goat paid with grain, sealed and seen again. A kind of rap, but ancient. You chuckle, wondering if future generations will think this was how you always did it. And then the rain comes. Not a drizzle, a deluge. Gutters overflow. Clay tablets left outside dissolve into slick puddles of half-legible regrets. The Temple of Archives floods, and half the ambiguous section melts into one giant blob of softened history. You help rescue what you can. Some tablets are savable. Others, well, let's just say the history of Sumer now contains a few unintentional watercolors. Still, in the aftermath, people don't despair. They adapt. The temple orders new tablets with waterproofing resin. Merchants begin issuing duplicate receipts, one for them, one for the gods. The archive reopens with a new motto. If it was worth doing once, it's worth recarving. And you feel strangely proud, because in this strange world of fish trades, shadow barters, goat quarrels, and emotional accounting, the receipt has become something more than just record keeping. It's memory, it's poetry, it's proof that we tried. You settle in your workshop once more, where your apprentice has crafted a receipt that simply says, thank you. No trade, no numbers, just that. And that somehow feels like the most valuable record of all. The weather clears by morning, leaving behind a fresh layer of silt on every flat surface and a soggy smell in the air, equal parts wet goat and clay slurry. You shuffle outside with the cautious pace of someone who has slipped on wet tablets before, and you're immediately greeted by a group of teenagers playing what can only be described as receipt dodgeball. They've taken broken tablets from the temple's discard pile and are hurling them at one another across a courtyard, laughing like maniacs. You watch a particularly sharp shard fly past someone's head and thunk into a wall beside a posting that reads, Temple Library now accepting fictional receipts. You blink. Fictional? Inside the scriptorium, you're met with a pile of clay fragments inscribed with entirely fabricated exchanges. I traded my sadness for a bowl of stars, reads one. Another, this tablet confirms I once kissed a river goodbye. At first, you're appalled. This undermines everything you've built. Receipts were meant to be real, weren't they? But then the head librarian shrugs. People want to remember feelings now, not just things. Historians still argue whether these poetic receipts mark the birth of literature or just a temporary distraction from accurate record keeping. But the line between truth and story was always blurred, wasn't it? You remember early tablets that inflated trade weights for prestige. Was that lying or branding? Outside, the market is bustling again. Despite the soggy streets, commerce flows like nothing ever happened. One fishmonger now offers buy 3, get 1 poem free deals. He hands you a tablet with a sketch of a fish smiling wistfully. You don't know why it moves you, but it does. Back at your workshop, your apprentice shows off a new system he's devised: mood receipts. Each transaction now includes a clay emoji, essentially, a little face pressed next to the script to denote the emotional state of the buyer. The priest bought incense while frowning. A young woman paid her dowry with nervous optimism. You resist the urge to laugh, but ultimately give in. It's ridiculous. It's also genius. You're invited to a merchants guild meeting where the topic of discussion is brace yourself, receipt fraud. Someone has been duplicating tablets and claiming goods twice. It was bound to happen eventually. Fraud is the sincerest form of bureaucratic flattery. Solutions are proposed: multi-signature receipts, time-dated seals, even using a second language on the back for official redundancy. You suggest simply branding the culprit as too clever for their own good and calling it a day, but no one laughs. Merchants are a humorless bunch when it comes to losing olives. On your way home, you pass a child selling memory tablets by the riverbank. He offers to inscribe any moment you describe, real or imaginary. I can make it happy, sad, or somewhere in between, he says cheerfully. You ask for a record of the time you first bartered for a fish using only interpretive dance. He nods seriously and scribes something that looks suspiciously like the word for absurd. You pay anyway. At night, your apprentice brings you a new clay format, smaller, rounded, portable. He calls it receipt on the go. It fits in the palm, shaped like a smooth river stone with micro-wedge marks etched along the curve. You squint at it, wondering aloud if it will catch on. He shrugs. Only if people stop losing them in puddles. You sit down together and start cataloging the week's most unusual trades. The categories are less about goods now, more about tone. Suspicious generosity, overconfident lending, unasked for returns. One entry reads, returned a gift. It didn't feel deserved. You stare at that one longer than the others. In the distance, temple bells echo. Someone has miscounted again, and it's become a weekly ritual. Bells, confusion, and a scolding priest. Tradition, basically. You think about how far things have come. From crude notches on clay balls to full narrative receipts, some of which are longer than the original trade. You think about how your original idea, just to track some goats, has become a kind of civilization mirror. Not just what we exchanged, but why and how it felt. You begin drafting your own fictional receipt. Traded ambition for quiet. You set it by the window to dry, next to yesterday's thank you. The next day, the temple scribes begin compiling a best-of archive, curated tablets from across the kingdom, chosen not for importance, but for charm. One entry reads, traded one sandal for a story better than sandal. The archive is open to public submissions. You send in one of your early receipts, the one with the smudged seal and crooked lines. You title it, The First One. A week later, you receive a reply tablet, selected for charm and historical misjudgment. Congratulations. You laugh so hard you almost drop your soup. The older you get, the more the receipts blur together. Not because they're unimportant, but because they're familiar, comforting. Like friends whose names you forget, but whose faces warm you still. At sunset, you go for a walk. The air smells like baked earth and fading sunlight. A vendor calls out, offering dream receipts, clay tokens to be placed under your pillow, promising better sleep and fewer regrets. You buy 2, one for you, one for your apprentice. You don't believe in magic, but something about the weight of clay feels reassuring, like it might just hold you in place, gently, while the world keeps turning. The rainy season ends not with a thunderclap, but with a soft, reluctant drizzle that fades into a dusty morning breeze. Streets are drying, sandals stop squelching, and the clay finally holds its shape again without collapsing like a wet biscuit. You're grateful. There's only so many lopsided receipts a civilization can tolerate before collapse. Today begins with a messenger from the city of Uruk bearing a wax-coated basket and an invitation written in alarmingly stylish cuneiform. You can barely read it. It's all swoopy strokes and elaborate ligatures, clearly penned by someone who's forgotten that wedge marks were invented for clarity, not calligraphy competitions. The invitation is from a fellow scribe named Ninmuzi, who claims to have created a fully integrated receipt-based accounting temple. She promises wonders: automatic balance tabulations, token verification kiosks, and possibly coffee. You're intrigued. You pack a small bag, hand your apprentice the key to the archive, he'll lose it within a day, and head out along the canal paths toward Uruk. As you travel, merchants along the way talk of Ninmuzi like she's some mythical beast. She codes numbers into the tablet's edge, one claims. She tracks future transactions, says another. You begin to worry she's invented the Sumerian version of cryptocurrency. Uruk looms ahead, larger, louder, and somehow always more fashionable. Even the dogs look like they know they belong to an important city. Inside the temple grounds, you're ushered through corridors lined with smooth, imported lapis lazuli. They've spent more on wall accents than your entire village has on education in a decade. And there she is, Ninmuzi herself, hair perfectly oiled, tunic crisp, and an eyebrow perpetually arched like she's always slightly amused. "You're the goat counter from Lagash, yes?" she says with a grin. You nod. "And you're the scribe who gave receipts personality disorders?" She laughs. "Come, let me show you what we've done." Her system is a marvel. She's combined cylinder seals with engraved weight indicators and even added tiny pegs for counting variables like humidity or delays. One tablet includes a spot for emotional state of transaction. Another, disturbingly, features a flowchart titled, "Was it a fair trade?" Be honest, you're stunned. This is what bureaucracy dreams of when it falls asleep. You ask her what inspired it all. She shrugs. People lie. Clay doesn't, unless you bake it wrong. Historians still argue whether Ninmuzi's system was truly revolutionary or just delightfully pedantic, but there's no denying its elegance. Even the temple priests, usually allergic to change, have started filing their own internal receipts for things like borrowed incense, never returned, or emotional toll of ritual dancing. You spend a week in Uruk, learning the new system, copying tablets, and gently mocking their stylized wedge fonts. At one point, you and Ninmuzi get into a heated debate about whether receipts should include weather data. She says yes. You say only if it was raining hard enough to smudge the ink. She says that's subjective. You say so is everything. She wins. Before you leave, she gifts you a personal tablet, a receipt for your visit. One traveler received inspiration, self-doubt, and an unwanted lecture about font sizes. No returns. You carry it like a talisman. Back in Lagash, your apprentice greets you with clay-covered hands and a sheepish grin. "I may have lost the archive key." "And the archive." You groan. Then you laugh. Then you groan again. "It's fine. Most of the tablets are probably still in the right building. Probably." You get to work adapting some of Ninmuzi's ideas. You simplify her design, keeping the emotional state pegs but dropping the humidity index. Your clay's too moody for that kind of ambition. You even begin offering receipt consultations, where you review someone's trade records and gently suggest, maybe you don't need that many goats. Word spreads. People begin treating you like a clay oracle. "Should I marry the potter?" one asks, holding up a receipt for joint property. You read the tablet and say, "Only if you like lopsided bowls." They nod solemnly and walk off to think about it. You realize something odd is happening. The receipts are starting to tell stories, not just dry facts about fish and flax, but stories of choices, regrets, triumphs. You're not just documenting what people did, you're documenting who they are. It's terrifying, and it's beautiful. One day, a caravan from Elam arrives, bringing with them strange rectangular tablets unlike anything you've seen. They call them flat books. Each contains multiple etched narratives linked by theme. One, for example, chronicles every bad trade a single man made over 20 years, like a cautionary tale in clay. You start assembling your own. You call it the Book of Receipts I Regret. It's instantly popular. Your apprentice makes one titled Receipts I Forged but Felt Guilty About. It sells out in a week. He's now richer than you. You consider being bitter, but he gives you a hug and a tablet that reads, "One master traded knowledge for chaos, gained love." You keep it beside your sleeping mat. At the year's end, you hold a festival. Not for gods, not for harvests, but for the humble receipt. People dress as their favorite trades. One man comes as the overcharged fisherman. Another wears 2 tunics and carries a sign, "I bought this twice." There's food, music, and clay-slinging contests, non-lethal mostly. That night, you walk through the empty square, littered with discarded tokens and laughter echoes. A child runs past you yelling, "I'm the banana I never bought." You don't even question it anymore. You wake the next morning with a light ache in your knees and a smudge of clay on your cheek, either from the festivities or because your apprentice tried to bake a receipt under your sleeping mat again. It makes the text more intimate, he insists. You make a mental note to reassign him to livestock records. Today, though, something peculiar awaits you on your writing bench. A small cube-shaped parcel wrapped in date palm twine and sealed with a stamped image of a goose eating a cucumber. That's the personal seal of the tax collector from Nipper, which can only mean one thing. You are either about to receive an award or you owe them cucumbers. You open the parcel. Inside is a set of remarkably precise transaction tablets. But these aren't standard trade receipts. These are annotated, cross-referenced, color-coded using tinted slips of clay, and they include, wait for it, the return policies. For every item, you read one aloud. Received 1 basket of fermented fish heads, returnable within 2 moons unless fish heads become conscious. It's oddly poetic. There's a note. We heard about your festival. We want to host the next one in Nipper. Enclosed, template for festival receipt tracking and emotional reimbursement forms. You blink. Your small, absurdly earnest receipt celebration has started something. Soon, cities begin sending their own templates. Sipar includes a tablet mold shaped like a barley loaf. Offers perfumed clay so your receipts smell like juniper. One bold village sends a talking tablet, though it's just a kid hiding behind a curtain whispering, "Transaction denied." You can barely keep up. Your workspace becomes a museum of bureaucracy. People travel from across Mesopotamia to visit your house of records that tell the truth, mostly. You set up little clay dioramas, barter gone wrong, 3 goats too many, and the famous tablet that got wet and became philosophy. You even give a few lectures. People sit cross-legged as you explain the nuances of weight verification or the politics of seal theft. Someone in the crowd falls asleep halfway through. You take it as the highest compliment. At night, you look over your ledgers, now gently bound with braided rush cords, a new fashion in archive aesthetics, and you reflect on how far you've come. From scribbling goat counts in soggy clay to founding the first intercity standardization of trade documentation. Historians still argue whether this movement was born from necessity or simply because people really liked organizing things. Some call it the dawn of economic consciousness. Others, more skeptical, call it a bunch of bored scribes showing off. Both are probably right. Your favorite innovation? The regret clause. Every tablet now has a line for, "Would you make this trade again?" The answers vary. Some say yes, some say only with extra onions, and one tablet just says, "I miss her." You don't know who wrote that one. You don't need to. Even the high priests have started using receipts, sort of. They insist on calling them divine logs. But you can see through the gold lettering. It's still clay, still wedge marks, still someone trying to remember how many oxen they borrowed and why none came back. In your old age, your pace slows. Your jokes get worse. Your handwriting, Once crisp, now a little squiggly, like the clay is trying to wiggle out from under your fingers. But you keep writing. Because now the receipts aren't just for trade, they're for weddings, apologies, promises. There's even one child who brought you a tiny tablet that says, "I will clean my room, probably." You nearly cried. The apprentice, you stopped calling him that years ago, now runs the main archive. He teaches others, tells your stories, and always signs receipts with a little smiling fish. He says it makes the records friendlier. You don't disagree. One afternoon, you're sitting by the canal, squinting into the water as reeds sway like bored dancers. Someone asks you what it all meant. This obsession with clay, with tracking, with sealing, with double-checking someone's sheet math. You think for a long while, then say, it's not about goats. It never was. It's about making sure that when we trade a thing, we also trade truth, even if that truth is a little wonky sometimes. They nod, walk off. Maybe they got it. Maybe they just wanted directions to the bakery. Either way, you smile. That evening, you carve one final tablet. It's not for a trade, not for taxes, not even for a return. It's for you. It says, "Here lived one who believed even mud can remember." You sign it with your seal, just a simple spiral, nothing fancy, just enough to say, "Yes, I was here." You press it into the fire gently, not to harden it too quickly. Let it dry with patience, like a story told slowly. You rest. In the years that follow, your name begins to disappear from the newest receipts, not from disrespect, but because your work has embedded itself so thoroughly into everyday life that no one stops to question where it began. The Receipt Festival becomes an annual tradition across Sumer. Children in tiny tunics chant mock trade agreements. Couples give each other love tablets on their anniversaries. One popular inscription reads, "Traded solitude for laughter, no regrets." You're not forgotten, not exactly. Your face is etched on the corner of a commemorative clay brick in Lagash's City Hall. A smiling scribe holding up a stylus like a torch, captioned, "First to make boredom beautiful." There's a traveling play that reenacts your life. You're portrayed by a tall actor with exaggerated eyebrow waggles and a suspiciously modern sense of comedic timing. The goat scene always gets a laugh. You never quite remember owning that many goats. Back in the archive, your old apprentice, now head of documented memory, has made a few changes. There's an entire wing dedicated to emotional receipts. Clay tablets that don't record things, but one reads, "The sky was purple. I felt proud." Another says, "Shared bread. Didn't ask for anything in return." And somehow, through it all, the simple act of marking down a transaction has become a kind of art, a ritual. Proof not just that something happened, but that someone cared enough to remember it right. Historians still argue whether this was the origin of literature, of accounting, or just an early form of bureaucracy wrapped in warm clay and slightly smug commentary. You'd probably just grin and say, "Yes." Your apprentice writes a final tribute to you. "Here's to the scribe who made numbers feel like stories. We're still counting." Eventually, your tablet, the one you carved for yourself, makes its way to a temple vault. Future scribes touch it before exams for good luck. Children say it hums softly if you listen with your eyes closed. It doesn't, of course, but the idea lingers. You became the receipt. You became the memory. You became the thing left behind when the goats, the barley, the fish, the gnaw fade. And now, the wind down. Wind down. The fire is low now, its soft glow flickering against cool stone walls. The clay tablets rest in their shelves, neat rows of memory sleeping quietly in the dark. Outside, the reeds by the canal sway gently, whispering secrets to the breeze. You sit by the water one last time, watching the ripples spread in lazy circles. A frog chirps somewhere nearby. A breeze shifts through your tunic, not too cold, just enough to remind you that the world moves slowly, even when we aren't watching. Above, the stars appear one by one, taking their time. No rush. They've seen thousands of receipts, recorded in mud, carved with care, sealed with truth, and maybe a little mischief. You take a long breath in, then let it out, slow as the rivers bend. This world of soft clay and quiet math has taught you something, that even the most ordinary act, marking a trade, tallying sheep, remembering a favor, can become a kind of poetry if you look closely enough. So rest easy now. You've counted well, you've remembered clearly, you've left your mark, and somewhere in a sleepy archive beneath a dusty roof, a little wedge mark in soft clay still says, "You were here." Let the world fade, let the sounds drift. You've done enough. Sleep well, traveler.